way to govern. But leaving that aside, the most important element of any kind of border deal would be the parts of H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act, that actually change the game, that change the incentives that are bringing millions of people, 300,000 last month, a record in U.S. history, to the border to cross in illegally. And those incentives basically are that they know they will be released into the country if they cross illegally. About 85%, according to Secretary Mayorkas, were released last month. And they also know that they can use these made-up so-called lawful pathways, these parole programs that the Biden administration has been using to bring in people from Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, Nicaragua, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and on and on.
And so what are we looking for in terms of policy that would help the border become more secure here?
Well, things like the Remain in Mexico program, where if you came to the border illegally, you were not allowed to enter. If you wanted to claim asylum, you had to wait out your process in Mexico. Or if you came through a safe third country on your way here, as many of the so-called asylum seekers have, you had to go back to that safe third country. And if you got asylum there, stay there. Or if you had not applied for it, you had to apply for it. Those are two things. Also, to end the almost unlimited parole that the Biden administration has been handing out in defiance of obvious congressional intent and what's clearly stated in the law. Those would be things that they could do immediately to try to get some kind of control over the border right now.
And there's an argument, even coming from Democratic lawmakers, that without these illegal immigrants coming into our country, we'd lose a vital workforce, although they tend to work, in fields, and lower-end jobs. We'd lose that workforce. Well, what's your response there?
I just think that's a completely a bogus argument to say that our economy is dependent on illegal labor. If Congress believes, if the American people believe that we need labor for whatever purpose, agriculture, high tech, then we should pass laws that allow that to happen legally. And what is infuriating is to hear this argument that somehow you have to legalize the illegal because you are incapable of passing.
Yeah, and they want them to go into the military, too.
It just doesn't carry water.
Simon, I want to go back to the beginning here. You mentioned that it's not a good plan to pass this border policy with all these other things, the Ukraine funding. Why is that?
Well, I mean, in the old days, we used to have a different appropriations passed for each department. I think there were like 12 of them. And then recently, it's all slipped into these giant omnibus packages, which get shoved through at the last minute in a giant compromise, and are thousands of pages long that no one really has a chance to analyze and to read. This year, we've not, as far as I'm aware, passed a budget, but we're already considering supplemental funding. So after there's no budget, we're still trying to add another $106 billion to that non-budget, and it's divided up into funding for Ukraine, funding for Israel. I think there's money for Gaza in there, so we're funding both sides of that conflict, and then funding for the border. The Biden administration wants about $13 billion to spend as they've been spending it so far, meaning to bring people in, and conservatives want instead to see some reform that will stop the massive flow of illegal immigration.
That was Simon Hankinson, Senior Research Fellow at the Border Security and Immigration Center for the Heritage Foundation. Now, the United States is developing advanced technology with dangerous implications for America's safety. At a House Foreign Affairs meeting today, they pointed out that Congress can enforce export controls that would hamper China's access to critical technology, but export controls also have a limited impact.
Export controls alone don't provide a tool to prevent an American venture capitalist from saying, you know what, that's an interesting opportunity. I might not be able to ship a tool over to China, but I could invest $20 million in this upstart Chinese firm that's trying to build that same tool or that same design here in China. And then, as Matt says, helping that Chinese firm recruit talent, helping that Chinese firm build contacts in the industry to help them grow, because none of that expertise is technology. The export control just focuses on the technology. the Trump administration took very important actions against a couple of Chinese technology firms like Huawei Technologies, limiting exports to Huawei. What we have seen since is that China, of course, sets up lots of front companies and other companies to get that technology that Huawei then couldn't get.
Lawmakers and experts.
Coming up quick, we hear from some voters. And TV's Daniel Monahan has more on the views of a couple of businessmen and their take on things.
Carlos Ruiz is a quintessential small business owner. Based in Tucson, Arizona, he still cut raw material manufacturers including aircraft and medical device makers. The MBA and metallurgy graduate founded his company 21 years ago and runs it with his wife and 3 other employees. Ruiz originally supported Governor Ron DeSantis, impressed by his record in Florida and his landslide re-election as governor in 2022. But these days, he leans Trump.
I object to the country going in a direction where one political party will prosecute and persecute their opponents.
Ruiz says the economy was good under the former president, mentioning the low interest rates and inflation and jobs shifting back home to the U.S. from China.
And so I saw these opportunities where manufacturing was migrating back to the United States.
Farmer and livestock breeder Bill Kauser looks after more than 5,000 head of cattle. He also grows corn and soybeans on his Iowa farm. Kauser says the country needs someone who can get the job done right.
When Trump was in there, he made a lot of promises and he kept most of them.
The farmer is unhappy with the direction of the current administration.
As farmers and livestock producers gone backwards, when we look at things like free trade.
Kauser is leaning towards former President Trump, but he misses the good old days when he felt there was more middle ground and candidates were less extreme to the right or the left. For whoever gets in office, Kauser says there's a lot at stake.
We're going to have people here that are going to be movers and shakers. We have to get some things stopped today and some things turned around for tomorrow, or this country is going to change really fast.
The New Hampshire primary is on January 23rd. Current Real Clear polling averages have former President Trump up by 13 points. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
It's ramping up campaign efforts in New Hampshire as its first in the nation primary is just days away. But new polls show a narrowing lead for Trump compared to Iowa. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Today, all leading GOP candidates are hitting the campaign trail in New Hampshire as Trump touts his historic win in Iowa.
The largest margin of victory in GOP history. Is that good?
A new poll released by Suffolk University, Boston Globe, and NBC shows that 50% of likely New Hampshire voters support Trump. But unlike in Iowa, where Trump led both second place DeSantis and third place Nikki Haley by some 30 points, the poll shows that Trump's leading Nikki Haley by only 26 points in New Hampshire. DeSantis, meanwhile, is polling only at 5%. And another poll by the American Research Group shows that Trump and Haley are tied at 40% in New Hampshire. And the reason for a seemingly tighter race in New Hampshire can be attributed to a few reasons. For example, unlike in Iowa, undeclared and independent voters can actually vote in a New Hampshire primary. And recent polling has shown that Nikki Haley actually has quite some support from the less conservative base in New Hampshire. And as Haley is increasingly campaigning and putting all her efforts in New Hampshire race, Trump is again tugging between the courtroom in New York and the campaign trail today. That's amid another development on the efforts to remove him from the ballot. A judge in Maine today and told election officials to wait until the U.S. Supreme Court decides on Trump's eligibility for the ballot. And that's despite an earlier decision to remove Trump from the state's primary ballot. It means that Trump can effectively stay on the Maine GOP ballot when March 5th, which is Super Tuesday, comes. And that's as the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to hear oral arguments in a similar case involving the Colorado Supreme Court ruling earlier next month.
Package, which includes returning to Trump-era policies like Remain in Mexico, reforming parole authority, and more.
We must have change at the border, substantive policy change. Restoration of the Remain in Mexico policy. It is the end of catch and release. It is reform to the broken asylum and parole systems.
But we're seeing a fundamental difference in the messaging coming from House Republicans and Senate Republicans. Senate Leader Mitch McConnell today saying that Republicans need to make compromises, and it's now or never. Listen to this.
If we had a 100% Republican government, President, House, Senate, we probably would not be able to get a single Democratic vote to pass what Senator Langford and the administration are trying to get together on. So this is a unique opportunity to accomplish something.
Senate Democrats say they're working in good faith with Republicans to try to find a compromise on border security so that this state secured. However, they say Republicans shouldn't be making this dependent upon changes at the border, which is one of the most complex and highly partisan topics here on Capitol Hill. Senate negotiators working on this deal have not yet released legislative text or even a framework around this border security and foreign aid deal. However, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he hopes they can have this deal by next week. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Asking taxpayers for more money. But more money isn't going to solve much on the border, because what we are seeing isn't a money problem. It's a policy problem. It's a problem of not enforcing U.S. immigration law. No amount of money can bad policy.
They witnessed House committee hearings. Most needed changes are expedited removals, detaining individuals waiting for their court dates instead of releasing them into the country. Democrats said if immigrants were allowed to work, it would activate the economy.
We actually have to make it easier for these individuals to participate in our economy, get a job, support themselves,
and put Americans out of work.
Meanwhile, Texas is facing a deadline tonight to hand Shelby Park back to Homeland Security. Last week, Texas National Guard took control over the border park. Shortly after, 3 immigrants tragically drowned in the Rio Grande close to the park. After the drowning, Homeland Security sent a letter saying Texas has to hand the park back on January 18th. Otherwise, Homeland Security will consider all other options available to restore Border Patrol's access to the border. However, a Monday court filing confirmed that the National Guard wasn't actually alerted of the drownings in time to save the immigrants. And lastly, New York Governor Kathy Hochul wants to add about $2.4 billion in aid to deal with New York City's illegal immigration crisis.
Here's the problem.
That would bring the state support for the Big Apple to
Y'all
$4.3 billion.
to come in, but you don't want to pay for it.
NTD News.
Israel is now focusing much of its military operations in the southern Gaza. Supporters, including conservative Shapiro, are now saying that nominee in that regard. Many DeSantis supporters are pushing their support. What does this tell us?
Well, I think it's a good thing that there are DeSantis supporters who are going to put our eggs in Trump's basket now. It's clear that have decided that he's going to be the nominee, and we're going to back him. Some DeSantis and Nikki Haley still with DeSantis and Nikki Haley, even though they don't have a chance of winning, which is I think Win really says whether people like Trump or not, he in the Republican Party, whether he's the preferred, really he represents people who feel inside by the American and who feel represented by the American elite. I mean, look at what happened on CNN on Monday night. People that the reason they voted for Trump, Iowans voted for Trump, is because they are white evangelical racists. I think regular voters, middle America voters, said that, and they associate Trump with that struggle with the American elite, and so they like I said, they recognize themselves in him and they're supporting him. And if you ask Trump supporters why do you support Trump, oftentimes they don't say immigration policy or the economy, although those are things that people care about. They say he sticks up for us. They say he's on our side. That, I think, is the takeaway from Iowa, and that's going to be the takeaway for the rest of this general election.
And given all of that, DeSantis isn't expected to do well in New Hampshire. What does his campaign future look like? When might we expect him to drop out?
It's a really good question. I don't think we can really know. I think it's going to depend on how much money, because is there any campaign. So if the money dries up, or all of them are actually hating, these aren't real conservatives who care about. These are people, Trumpers, who are advocates, forever war advocates, and so I think once the money dries up, he'll be forced to resign. Do I think he'll be as gracious as Vivek was? I don't think that DeSantis has the social skills to do that, frankly, and I think he has really bad advisors who are going to tell him not to concede in a very conciliatory way. So I don't think it's going to be a good resignation when it happens. I don't know when it will happen. It's all going to depend on the money.
Evita Duffy Alfonso, thank you so much for joining us. While Iran, which backs the Hamas terrorist group, is now causing international concern by launching missiles in neighboring countries. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest.
On Wednesday, Israeli forces reported striking this vehicle, killing a high-level terrorist in the West Bank. Video captured after the strike shows Israeli forces surrounding the vehicle and trying to put out the fire. The IDF said that terrorist and other members of his cell were planning to carry out a large-scale terrorist attack in the near future. This precision strike in the West Bank comes as the IDF reported killing over 30 terrorists in the southern Gaza Strip in Khan Yunis in the past 24 hours.
The war continues, will continue until the end. Complete all our goals. The return of the abductees, the elimination of Hamas, and the making sure Gaza will pose a threat to Israel.
According to Israeli news, net said the goal was 20. And as the Iranian-backed terror Hamas will be in its seats, Iran gun launching attack within its own border other countries. On Tuesday, Iran launched missiles and attacked drones at Pakistan, killing at least 2 children. Pakistan state-run media said the strikes hit 2 bases of the Sunni Muslim terrorist group called Jaish al-Adl. Iran's foreign minister said those attacked were linked to Israel. An official from Pakistan, which is a nuclear-armed country, said this about the attack.
Pakistan has always sought cooperation from all the countries of region, including Iran, to combat terrorism and has right to respond to any aggression committed against its sovereignty.
And on Monday, Iran launched strikes at Iraq. Iran hit a building in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq, which Iran claims was used by Israelis to conduct intelligence operations. This was Iran's first direct military attack in the region linked to the Israel-Hamas war. The Iraqi Kurdish prime minister had this to say after the attack.
What's surprising, we are not a part of this conflict. We don't know why Iran is retaliating against civilians.
They're doing exactly what they want to do.
We have no animosity towards any of our neighbors, especially Iran.
An Israeli spokesperson did not confirm or deny whether the location was used for Israeli intelligence operations. Israel is also facing attacks from Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, and Yemen's Houthis have been firing